I thought I'd take a minute to consider the CSS display property and some of its values as we move towards using CSS to create page layouts for our designs. Every HTML element that we write is rendered into the browser viewport with a default display property value. And usually that is a value of either block or inline. And so you will have kind of noticed different elements having these attributes. Block level elements sit on top of each other in the HTML kind of hierarchy or flow. Container type elements like divs, header, main, section, all have a display property default of block. And also most typographic elements like headings and paragraphs are also block. So as I said, that means that they stack on top of each other, kind of like paragraphs in text with a carriage return between all of them. They also take up the full available width in the viewport or in their container. So yeah, they're kind of set to a width of 100%. So let me just add a few block level elements to my HTML here. I'm going to grab some paragraphs from this blind text generator here. So copying 6 paragraphs over into CodePen, and I'll paste them into, oops, I need to make sure that I copy the paragraph tags as well. So here we have 6 paragraphs, and a paragraph is a block level element. So it has a default display property, display value of block. And you can see that my paragraphs here all sit on top of each other with some space in between. And if I go down to my CSS and put a border around these elements, you can see that they take up the full width of the viewport or the container, and the container at the moment is the body tag. So whatever the body tag width is, these block level elements will take up 100% of that. And you can see that they don't collapse next to each other because they take up that full width. They stack on top of each other. So other elements that aren't block level elements are things that kind of sit inside, text kind of elements that sit inside paragraphs. Things like anchor tags, span tags, M tags, strong tags, things like that. So I'm going to add a few of those to the to this text here. So maybe a couple of anchor tags. We'll have a look at how they behave. So an anchor tag inside a paragraph tag. And you can see that kind of blue underlined default style there. And you can see that it sits within that paragraph tag without creating a carriage return. It sits inline as opposed to on top of an element. Let me just add a style, a border style around that inline tag to show how that kind of works inside that block level element. So it's an inline element inside a block element. Let's add a couple more, maybe we'll add a couple more tags just to kind of show how that works. It's another inline element there. Now a span tag. So a span tag is a tag that we can use in conjunction with a class to add kind of style within a paragraph. So it doesn't kind of look like anything, but if I do add some CSS to the span, add a border there, you can see that it takes up just that the line height of the paragraph and the width. And maybe one more, we'll add an M tag, maybe a strong tag. We'll add an M for emphasis. And you can see that M tag there, looks italic. Let's style that with a border as well. So I quite like using this border technique to troubleshoot elements. If I see something that's padding kind of doesn't look right, it is one of the first things that I do is add a temporary border style to it so I can see how the element kind of interacts with other elements in the viewport. Okay, now one thing to notice with inline tags is that the margins and padding on an inline element don't act as you'd expect. Let me add some margin and padding. Might add a background color to kind of emphasize this. That should be a light grey, I think. Yeah, so I've added a light grey background color to my paragraph tags, which are block elements with the default property of block. By the way, we would write that like this. That's how we would actually add that to an element's CSS rule, but we don't kind of have to. It's already kind of a default; it's inherent. But I could change its display element. I could change a paragraph's display to inline if I wanted to. I could also use the none. If something is displayed none, you pretty much hide it from view. Let's take that off. So bring it back to display block. I was talking about margins and padding and how they affect block line and inline elements. So for a block element, margin works as we would expect. If I put a margin of 10 pixels on to a block line element, it separates it. It gives it a margin around that element of 10 pixels. I might make that a bit bigger so that we can see that taking effect. And adding padding will add some space inside the element so that grey background will seem bigger. Like so. So that doesn't occur with inline elements. If I add particularly with the top and the bottom. So if I look at the anchor tags here, if I add some padding, I'll add a background color. Another grey. See it's a bit darker there. Now I can add padding to an inline element. Just add 30 pixels of padding. But you can see that it doesn't push any of the other elements around. So in this instance here, you can see that now those two elements intersect with each other, whereas two block line elements will kind of be separated by that kind of carriage return that's there, and also margin doesn't kind of work, particularly in the top and bottom of an inline element. You can see it does work on the left and the right, but nothing actually occurs on the top and bottom. And so that's kind of really the main differences between an inline and block elements. Block elements stack on top of each other. Inline elements sit within the flow of text. So inline elements kind of part of the text, part of the paragraph, whereas block elements are the paragraphs themselves. There are times when you might want to have an element that has kind of both of those characteristics, that has, the ability to kind of sit next to each other, like inline elements do, but at the same time has the ability to add proper margins and padding top and bottom. And that might be in the case of a button. And I'm going to add an anchor tag right down the bottom here. I might actually add two. Oops. Oh God. Add another button. So two buttons there. And they do have, I might give them a class as well. No, I'll just keep going. And I'll go to the anchor tag here. They've got margins and padding. I might just take these ones out of the equation so that they're not affected. I could differentiate them with classes, but I'm not going to worry at the moment. So I've got these two buttons down the bottom, and because they're inline elements, they sit next to each other. But you can see that their margin and padding doesn't work. So how do we kind of move them? How do we separate them from other elements like that? Well, we use a different value for the display property of these elements, and I can simply add a display value of inline dash block. Oh, I'll need to spell it correctly, of course. And when I do that, you can see that these elements here now have both the attributes of a block element and an inline element, in that their margins and padding act as you'd expect, but they also kind of sit next to each other. So the inline block display value can be really useful for furthering our kind of layout capabilities.